Hi, Jackie. My name is Christy Tchaikovsky, and I'm trying to get some information about my case. Can you help me?
I don't know, Christy, if I can. I don't have your full file in front of me if you want to, you can ask me some questions. I can get back with you.
Awesome. Okay, or maybe I could just ask you hypothetical questions. Now, when you remove children from their home, what's the standard procedure?
Well, to clear that up, Christy, we do not remove. We don't have the authority to remove. That authority is left with the juvenile office, law enforcement, or a medical doctor, or the court.
Okay, then what is your role then? I mean, are the social workers who were, I guess, appointed as liaisons who write up case plans and stuff, aren't they part of that process?
Well, this is the way it happens is when we go out, for instance, on an investigation, there's different ways that children come into our care.
Mm-hmm.
They can come in if they're in the hospital and the doctor believes there's a concern for safety, and they can sign what we call a CS-33, giving temporary custody to us for a period of time, and then that has to be either that time frame, and the law enforcement also signs one of those if we're out with law enforcement. And so either that time frame is let to expire, or the juvenile office, in the meantime, has to file something within the court for the court to actually take custody.
Okay.
That kind of gives you an idea of the process.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I guess you're saying normally there would be an investigation before children are removed?
In most cases, that's how it's. Many times we get custody of children during the course of an investigation.
Okay, now would an investigation mean somebody just showing up at your door with guns and taking your children away without any questions asked based on a false report?
We don't carry guns, ma'am, so that would not
Yeah,
be
I understand. They would come with cops, right?
The police, yes, the police would be there. The police may have taken custody at that time if they felt the children were at risk of being unsafe.
Okay, now if the children weren't and had no bruises, no situations, anything, were sitting here perfectly happy at home, had never even heard of children's division in our life, they just showed up at the door and took them, then what would be the procedure from there? Well,
you went through this, Christy. There is a 72-hour meeting along with a protective custody hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the judge determines whether to keep custody and keep the children in foster care or give the children back to either the parent or the non-offending parent. A lot of times will get custody.
Okay, so during that time, though, there's a case plan written, right?
There's a written service agreement.
A service agreement. Okay, and what is to be contained in that service agreement? Is it supposed to be, well, if you do this, whether or not the parents agree with it or not, but let's say something I hear commonly, people that have like drug and alcohol problems, that the parent, if you go to rehab, you have a chance of getting your children back, or if you go to anger management classes, you have an opportunity to get your children back, or whatever the case may be. I've heard of many of them. Isn't that typical that the parents are given it is?
It's
okay.
The written service agreement is written with the parent and regarding the issues that got us involved and got the removal of children.
Okay.
So it's tied together that way, and they're usually time limited.
Awesome. Okay, now have you ever seen a case plan that did not offer the parent, the custodial, lifelong parent, to bring their children home?
A written service agreement?
Yeah, have you ever seen a written service agreement that did not contain an option for the parent to take the child home?
I don't understand your question. You mean like if it was written that the parent chooses to have the child go live with grandparents, for instance?
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is, in my case plan, there was never any such order. There was no, Christy, if you do this, you can have your children back. Go take these classes. Go do whatever. My case plan consisted of me going to meetings, showing up at court.
What kind of,
and getting,
FST?
yes, showing up for meetings, showing up for court, home visits, and the only requirement of me outside that was to get a psychological evaluation, which I did a year ago, which came back with no diagnoses. The psychologist said, send the children home. But for some reason, the judge never got that. And so those were the only things required of me. Obviously, all of those things were completed and done, yet there was another case plan written with the same thing. Christy, just keep showing up, and that's it. There was never an option, if you do this, you can bring whatever this is, insert whatever your typical stuff here, whatever you want. I was never given that. Is that typical?
It's only typical if the parents don't cooperate and are not available.
Okay, so don't cooperate for what? You mean?
As far as being available and being at the meetings where we can discuss, or being available for home visits, so that it can be signed and.
Okay,
discussed.
So let's say the parent was there for every one of those things that were required on the case plan. What would be the reason to not give the parent an option to bring the children
I have
home?
no answer for that, because you should have a copy of it.
Yeah, I do have a copy, and I was never given such thing. And in fact, I haven't received a copy of the so-called new case plan for 7 or 8 months. Let's see, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So 8 months. I haven't received anything for 8 months. And I had cooperated with every single thing up until that point.
When you went to court, did you ask at that time for?
Well, I keep asking my worker, and she yells at me and hangs up on me. She won't answer the question. She'll try to use semantics and change it around, but she's not actually answering the questions that I'm asking. Why was I not given an option to take my children home? Even the intake report said.
And Christy, you have to understand, once children are in custody, it's up to the court to determine when they come home. Of course, it's based on our recommendation.
Yeah,
so,
and your recommendations never said anything about, never gave me an option to take my children home. But what's really interesting on your intake reports when my children were taken in, besides the fact that Rebecca Pagent testified June 4th last year that there was no abuse, there was no neglect, why was I not given an opportunity to take my children home?
I think you need to ask the court that. When you go to court, again.
Who? I've asked those things and they don't answer me. I don't have
the judge doesn't answer you?
No. He throws me out. He doesn't want to hear anything from me. And he won't even give me an archive of what happened in court to prove what I'm saying is true. I can guarantee, in fact, not only in the court did they testify that, I have copies of the original paperwork that say these allegations do not constitute the guidelines for abuse. Okay, also, whatever the allegations were changed. They went from me supposedly doing something that they already testified I did not do. In fact, Emily Nichols actually testified that she didn't even write those reports, the ones that your agency was going off of. It had her name on it, and I picked up the papers from the court, so clearly she did make those allegations, but in court in front of the judge, she denied it. So essentially, in addition to that, she testified that the initial reports of the allegations that they came up with, they said were not true, they said did not happen or could not have happened. So given that
who wrote those?
Well, Emily Nichols, well, I can't tell you that. She says she didn't write them. She testified that she didn't write them even though her names were on them. So apparently, I mean, somebody wrote them. That's what was printed in the paper. That's what was, said at court.
Printed in what paper?
The newspaper, when your agency spoke to the newspaper about what a child abuser I am, even though there was no evidence, they were just allegations.
Who from my agency talked to the news
It was all
about
over
you?
the news. KSPR, the judge reprimanded him over a year ago. But yes,
Who?
Rebecca, Cleo, and I'm not sure who else. Rebecca Pagents.
No, they did not.
Yes, they did.
No.
They were on the news.
We're not permitted. We're not
I
permitted to
understand.
talk to the
I understand
news.
what you're saying is true. I know what you're saying is true. The judge even said the exact same thing, yet they did it anyways. Would you like to see the news reports?
Oh, I will check into this, Christy, because
Please. Thank
they
you.
know that is not
I
policy.
understand.
We have a
I understand.
communications person in Jefferson City that talks to any news.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, if you can get the archives, Judge Justice, June 4th, 2010, you will hear them say, yes, we did talk to them. And Justice said, you're not supposed to do that, and gave him kind of a dirty look, and they're like, oh, well, they just brushed it under the rug, and that was it. So, yes, they did talk to the newspaper, they did speak with the news, and they used it all over the news to slander me, even though they already said those allegations were not true, and the people who wrote them, Emily Nichols, the so-called investigator who came out to my house, who never said a thing, never once did they interview me, never once did they ask questions, they just showed up one day with a cop, took my children, no questions asked. I have never once been able to answer to these allegations to anyone, not in court, not to any of the workers within your division.
Christy, following that investigation, you should have received a letter from us giving you your right to appeal whatever the decision was of the investigation.
That hasn't happened. The worker, Rebecca, has not given me anything.
No,
As
it wasn't Rebecca. It was the investigation piece of this, the very, very onset of the case. You get a letter that states that you have 60 days to appeal that for a review.
Okay,
and that request comes to me.
That didn't happen. Another thing that didn't happen.
Well, I'm going to look in the file at this because
please.
They are sent return receipt requested.
Yeah, excellent. I'm so glad because that's what I just kept asking the worker. When did I supposedly receive this? Here's another thing that I never received. I have been the sole custodian, caretaker of my children for 13 years. No daddy, no anything. Nobody had any interest in raising their children, paying child support, any of their court-ordered obligations. Not once. And she is trying to use, our case plan said reunification with the custodial parent. Well, being that I was the custodial parent their entire lives, she just conveniently forgot. And last August, and this is another thing that I hope you look into, last August they supposedly gave away custody of one of my children. The first I ever heard about it was when I was in court last month with Judge McConnell sitting for Judge Justice. And that's where I found out that last August of 2010, they supposedly gave custody away. I never, ever heard of it till 7 months later. But Rebecca knew this whole time and didn't tell me. I've never received any paperwork on that. I never even knew that was going on, such as a custody court hearing coming up. The first I ever heard about it was last month. How can that happen legally? And Rebecca won't give me a copy of these papers.
What papers are you wanting?
She says that custody was given away of one of my children last August.